Welcome to Just Settled. On today's episode, we have with us Brian LaBovick, the founder of LaBovick Law Group, representing all of Florida and Massachusetts for personal injury, maritime law, social security, disability. Brian, we are so happy to have you here on Just Settled. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Dan. Happy to be here.
Yeah. And just to kind of get started, I know we were talking about this case, which I am excited to dive into because it's so interesting and kind of just has a lot of, very sort of difficult angles to talk about, but very, unique pieces of this case.
It's unique for sure.
Before we do that, though, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about you and how you got into law, because you have a really cool story of how you decided to be a lawyer all the way back in high school, and you fought a traffic ticket and won. Can you kind of tell us the details of that story?
Yeah, thanks. So I was a young kind of kid in high school, and a good friend of mine who is a doctor now had convinced me that we should both be doctors. So I was involved in every pre-science class you could think of, chemistry and biology and physics and physiology and all this stuff. And I was into working out. I was on the wrestling team. And so I was downtown working out at a gym because that was the coolest gym in Dayton, Ohio, Gold's Gym. We actually had a Gold's, which was awesome. And I had lots of hair. I had big, so I had a bandana around my head, tied around my head. Anyways, yeah, like the typical kid. So I'm driving and I come out of the gym and I'm on my way home and I go to make a right turn on red. And as I'm going around the right turn on red, I see there's a sign, which I didn't notice at first, that said no right on red. So I stopped and I backed up. Mm-hmm. And then I waited there and there was a police officer, two police officers in a car, two of them in one car. And they pulled beside me and they looked at me and I looked like, a typical punk hood. And they decided to pull me over and give me a ticket for it. Very non-eventful. They gave me the ticket for making a right turn on red, breaking the line, there's a stop line. So I broke the line. So they were like, you technically did make the right. I went backwards. They were like, I'm sorry. So they gave me the ticket and I fought it. And when I finally went to court on fighting it, I'm sitting waiting for the court to call me in, and a prosecutor comes over and introduces herself, and I'm Mrs. So-and-so, and I'm the prosecutor. And I was like, there's a prosecutor for a traffic ticket? She goes, yeah, in Ohio, we do that. We have a prosecutor, a prosecuting attorney. And I was like, wow, Dad, I need to get a lawyer. So my parents were with me, and my father said, there's no way I'm hiring a lawyer for a traffic ticket. You're doing it on your own, kid. So I was like, all right. So I walked in, and I was sitting there, and the judge called our case, and I came up, and the police officers came up, and I came up, and there was a prosecutor, and we're all sitting at our little tables. And she tries to explain the rules. All I heard was wah, 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 wah. I mean, I was super nervous. I didn't hear any of the rules. So she says, we're going to hear from the prosecutor first in her opening statement. And she got up and talked about the case. And it was completely wrong. She had no facts right. So I was like, Judge, stop. This is wrong. You may have the wrong case. This is wrong. I was like, this is wrong. She's got all the facts wrong. And the judge says, well, Mr. LaBovick, be quiet. You'll have your opportunity. Just wait. So I wait and I sit there patiently. She does this case. She gives me my opportunity to talk. I don't remember what I said. I'm sure I gave some very ineloquent, opening statement. And then she called her first witness, which was an officer. And she starts to ask some questions, and he's got the facts wrong. And I try to interrupt, and she tells me, you're going to have your chance to question the officer, right? And this was kind of this moment of clarity. So I said, all right. And my dad had his briefcase with him, and I said, I need a pad of paper and a pen. So he gave me a pad of paper and a pen, and I started scribbling down questions. Now, to date, I still do my cross-examinations this way. I listen to the direct and I write my questions down as I'm hearing the direct. And as I hear them, I start circling them and putting them in order to the way I want to cross-examine. And it's pretty much what I did that day. I scribbled down 7 or 8 questions areas that I thought I needed to talk to him about. And then I got up and I started to cross-examine this guy. And it was, isn't it true you were here for that? And didn't you do this? And I gave him all these leading questions. And by the time I was done with him, he admitted that the signage was in the wrong place for no right on red. And I thought, well, all right, if he admitted that, then I think that I have a good shot at winning this. So I just shut up. And I was like, oh, okay. When he was like, yeah, it might be in the wrong place. I was like, oh, okay, I'm out. I shut up. I sat down. And then she called the second officer. I did the same thing to him. Neither one of them got to hear each other because the judge luckily invoked the rule. If you don't know what the rule is, it means that the witnesses shouldn't listen to each other's testimony. Like if you're a witness, you stay outside the court until you're called. That way you can't base your testimony on anybody else. So the rule, so the other officer came in, I cross-examined him. He didn't admit to it per se, but he was like, well, he wasn't the officer, he was driving and whatever. So we got done with the case. We did our closings. I don't remember what I said in closing, quite honestly. And afterwards, the judge looked at everybody and said, I have reasonable doubt, so therefore I'm going to find him not guilty. So therefore, you win the case, Ms. LaBovick. And now I'd like to see you back in chambers. So I went back into chambers with the judge, and my dad's like, I'm going back to work. So he left, like, congratulations, he's out. So I go in with the judge, and I sit down with my mom, and she says, the judge is female. She says, what are you doing with your life? Like, you're a high school student. What do you plan on doing? And I was like, oh, I'm studying. I'm in pre-med. I'm going to be a doctor. She goes, you're not going to be a doctor. She goes, you're not going to be a doctor. You're going to be a lawyer. She goes, that cross-examination was amazing. For a young man to be able to do that and have that type of possession and keep control of the courtroom and be comfortable to do that. She said, you're meant to do this. I don't see very often a person who can come in and do that type of cross-exam. She goes, it's the best cross-exam I've seen in a week or two. Like, you're just good at this. Do this, kid. And I walked out of that courtroom knowing what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Like, I knew it right then. She was 100% right. I mean, I loved it. Being in the courtroom was amazing. The competitiveness was right up my alley. This give and take with the prosecutor was turning me on, like I really loved it.
That's awesome.
So I went through college, and people in college, they're like, what are you going to be? I'm like, I'm going to law school. And they're like, you'll change. Like, everybody changes, right? You're not going to be a lawyer. You'll figure something else out. And I've never done it. I went through law school, and my friends are like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to be a trial lawyer. Yeah. They're like, oh, we're going to be real estate lawyers. We're going to be transactional lawyers. We want to work for big firms. We want to do that. I'm like, I don't want to do any of that. I want to be a prosecutor. I want to learn to try cases, and then I want to be a trial lawyer. And that's exactly what I did. I was in every competition in my law school. I was on the Order of the Barrister, which is like the top 2 litigators coming out of the school. I got a very selective position in the Honors Justice Department, the honor grad, program. They don't take a lot of kids into the honor grad program. The only way to get to work with the U.S. attorneys, to be an AUSA and to work with them, is through the honor grad program. I picked that up as my first job, learned how to try cases, never went backwards. Like, that was it.
It was interesting to me how, like, at some crossroad of your life, especially like growing up, like one thing like that, like a person, that judge can like sort of like redirect you in a way that's like so helpful, right? Where they're like, no, like they're a little further down the road. They just, have the wisdom of life, and they're able to kind of be like, you're actually have like a real skill here, which is cool. It's an amazing story. I love that story.
I'm going to build on what you just said just for a second, Dan, if you don't mind. So that for anybody who's listening to this, like, it's just amazing to me how a small thing from someone like that, like just a moment, can change the trajectory of someone's whole life, right? And a few years ago, back in the 2009-10 period when the world crashed economically, we crashed economically too. Like, I've been on business podcasts talking about rebuilding and how to do all that, but I crashed economically. And my banker came in to talk to me because I owed a lot of money on a credit line to the bank. And after a while, we had used up our credit line. And he said, Brian, listen, the bank has a lot of faith in you. And we believe that you can do this. And we believe that you're good at what you do. We believe that you're innovative about what you do. You constantly are fighting the fight. And we're going to make sure that you stay afloat because we believe in you. That conversation, they didn't do anything different. They just said they believed in me, That conversation made me have so much faith in my own ability. Like, no one else had said that to me that had that type of an effect. And a banker I'm friends with the guy, but I'm not deeply friends with the guy. It's like this outside person changed the way I was, thinking about my future and helped out dramatically. And we built from that point forward, and it became good again. But it's just amazing. A little word of encouragement can help people out amazingly well.
Human connection, it's like that right moment, that right person, and it could be anybody. That's really, really amazing. So yeah, with that, let's kind of like dive into this case, because I do want to get into the case. The case itself was It's definitely one that I've not heard anything like this before. So you think this is going to be a very unique episode. So I'll kind of let you obviously overview it. It was your case. How did you first learn about this specific incident, the case? What were your first thoughts, your initial thoughts when it came across your desk? Want to share your settlement success stories? Join us as a guest on the Just Settled podcast. Visit our Instagram at Just Settled Case and click on the link at the top of the page to set up your interview today.
I learned about the case on the news because I heard about it before it came to our office because it was on the news for a while. Um, and it was a criminal case, a terrible, terrible criminal case, a tragic criminal case. And I heard about it on the news. And then the the person who was affected by the case, her next door neighbor had her call me. So just by coincidence, her next door neighbor knew us and had my cell phone number and had her call me directly right on my personal cell. And so that's how I got involved in the case because the victim of the crime ended up getting to me, or the mother of the victim of the crime got to me. So that's how we picked the case up. It was just a coincidental, lucky for me break. It was lucky. I say lucky. It's the hardest case that I've ever been involved in my life. It's been the hardest client I've ever had to deal with in my life. Um, and I just, in fact, I just yesterday referenced this case because it's been closed for a little bit, to a group of police officers. I was the keynote speaker for the Safety Council of Palm Beach County yesterday. And I referenced this case because this woman had been saved by one particular police officer on at least 5 occasions from suicide. I mean, like it's a really hard situation. And this officer stepped up and helped her. So tell me what you want to know about the case and we can get into the details because I've obviously teased people with how
Sure.
terrible it is.
Yeah, just kind of lay out, I think what happened, and we can start there from what this case actually was.
Yeah. So my client Karen allowed her son Giovanni to sleep over a friend's house.
Mhm.
It was his 13th birthday party, Giovanni's 13th birthday party. They were getting pizza at a local pizza place. Giovanni was there with his friends, right? And one of his friends had his older brother and his older brother's friend in the mall where they were at, right? So they invited these 2 older boys, 15 and 17 years old, to join the 13-year-old pizza party. And so at the end of the pizza party, Giovanni was invited to spend the night out at his friend's house.
Yeah.
And he went and did that. And the boys that were playing around that night. So what we didn't know, what no one knew, is that the 17-year-old boy was a very mentally disturbed individual. At least Giovanni's parents didn't know, his mom didn't know, no one knew. And the mother of the place where he went knew that he was problematic, but I don't think she knew the extent to which his problems had arisen. So they go over to this sleepover, and what no one realized is that earlier that day, the 17-year-old had gone to a local store and purchased a very large butcher knife, which he intended to kill the family with that night. And so he really didn't have an issue with my client's son, except that the boys were playing around that night and allegedly they were talking about, and it might have even happened at the pizza place when they were talking about their favorite stars. And Giovanni said, The Rock is God, is a God, something like that, some 13-year-old boy statement. And the 17-year-old, who, what no one knew is that he had been online with ISIS terrorists, becoming brainwashed for over 2 years or 3 years. And at this point, he was ready to try to leave the United States and join ISIS somewhere in the world and become an ISIS terrorist or murderer, whatever you want to call those people. But he had become converted to Islam. He had become a radicalized Islamist. And so he said to the boy, no, only Allah is God. It's blasphemous to say anything different. And my client said, F Allah, The Rock is God, or Dwayne The Rock Johnson is God. You're wrong.
Sure.
So that was basically his death sentence because he was blasphemous. So he went to the party that night. The boys were upstairs playing around. The two 13-year-olds, the 15-year-old and the 17-year-old are playing around until 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning. The mother, is that okay? Do you want me to hold up for a second? Did
No,
you want
no,
to ask?
I'm just listening. Yeah.
All right. So the mother is downstairs, staying awake, kind of listening to them, but the boys are upstairs playing, so she hears them. She falls asleep on the couch. All right. At 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, somewhere in there, the boys fall asleep, and the young boy who's the activated ISIS terrorist pulls his knife out and cuts my client's son's throat, Giovanni's throat, stabs him. His 13-year-old friend wakes up and hears it, right? Or no. The mother hears something like him screaming, moaning, something happens. The mother wakes up and comes up the stairs asking, hey, what's going on? What's going on? The 17-year-old appears in the hallway like in a horror flick with this knife in his hand, attacks her at the staircase, stabs her 12 or 20 times, like multiple stab wounds. She falls down the staircase, dying on the stairs. By that point, the 13-year-old had woken up and attacked him, which allowed his mother to escape down the stairs. He then gets stabbed a number of times. He jumps out his second-story window and runs to the neighbors next door, bleeding to death, his arms cut terribly, and gets them to call the police. At that point, the 17-year-old turns to his 15-year-old friend and wakes him up and tells him, hey, we need to leave. I've killed everybody else, but we need to go to Iran or Iraq and join ISIS.
God.
At that point, the police show up and arrest everybody, and it's a horror movie. It's a literal horror movie.
Yeah,
It's the worst story. It's a story that you hear about and you think, oh my God, how could that happen?
well, yeah, I mean, like you said, if someone's very emotionally unstable, unfortunately, or psychologically unstable, and then they're become brainwashed or just kind of go down a rabbit hole of this stuff, you don't know. There's a
Yeah.
variance people and what they might do. When you were first brought on to this case, did you have concerns or uncertainties about how it was going to play out or the outcome, or what was, because obviously there must have been a criminal case and then a civil case, right? So how did those things kind of work in conjunction, and what were just some of the obstacles or things that were challenges about this case for you, other
So
than it being obviously very emotionally difficult to deal with?
yeah, I will say that the hardest thing in the case was not the intellectual part of the case, which was interesting and hard as well, but the emotional part of dealing with the mom
Yeah.
and dealing with her family and dealing with her second child. So she was extremely volatile throughout the entire process, and rightfully so. you know um and unfortunately this triggered a lot in her from childhood, because she had a very terrible childhood. And so for her to stay stable and get over the terrible grief of this child was a very difficult thing to overcome. So as a firm, when you have a client like that, you really have to go out of your way to try to do everything possible to keep that person secure and safe, and get them the right counseling and get them the right environment, keep them safe. And it just takes a lot of the bandwidth of the group that gets assigned to that case. So I was personally on that case. I had my team on that case, but pretty much everybody that's in our PI department ended up in the Florida PI department ended up being involved in that. So that was the hardest part. The second part was the collectability part. I mean, like, this is an intentional tort. It's an intentional act. It's done by a person that was clearly mentally disturbed. How do you hold somebody liable that has a deep enough pocket to make that happen? The father of the murderer was deceased. I believe, this is allegedly, but I believe it was a heroin overdose when he was 13. He was not a great guy. The mother of the boy was not a stable person and not a wealthy person. And he was living part-time with his mother and part-time with his grandparents. So his grandparents were his stable force in the world, and they were living with him. So we didn't see a big, deep pocket there that was available to go into. Part-time living at grandparents was a reach under Florida law. The mother might have some liability for not warning people if she knew, but what does she really have? And would her homeowners cover her for that type of negligence was a huge question. Um, the mother of where the mother who got stabbed, the other victim in the case, what was her liability? Did she know? What did she know? We didn't know any of that. And then her boys, like, what did they know and how were they liable at all? Was there a problem? They're the victims as well. Can you hold them liable? Is homeowners going to cover it? Those were all big things. And then the super reach was the boy bought the knife that day from a store, and could we hold that store liable, which would have been the deep pocket, but an extreme liability reach, right?
In today's digital landscape, a strong social media presence holds significant importance for legal professionals. Recognizing this need, Practice 360 by LegalSoft is pleased to announce an exclusive promotion offering a comprehensive law practice social media solution free of charge for 30 days. Practice 360 is the all in one solution to elevate your law firm. Access a suite of services, including personalized mobile apps, website development, PR, and social media management. With everything centralized, say goodbye to juggling multiple providers. Elevate your firm's success with Practice 360 today. And you mentioned, obviously, right in this case where you're going to actually, from a civil litigation, perspective, like where is the pocket to actually go after or whatever to kind of, obviously, again, this is separate from criminal. In terms of the client's expectation, I'm assuming this kid must be in prison or whatever the criminal side of that is. Obviously, the expectation there is whatever the maximum penalty that can be delivered. In terms of the civil side, this is a wrongful death case, right? So what is, I mean, how do you even start measuring what kind of like restitution or what that conversation even looks like with defense counsel? You were on the prosecuting side of this.
Yeah, we were prosecuting the civil action against as many people as we could find responsible for allowing this to happen.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of digging and we found a lot of dirt. And that's what helped this case out a lot, is that there was much more here, which you would expect somebody that's that disturbed, right, is going to have a history where people learn about this problem.
Mhm.
And what we didn't know going in was the connection between the disturbed boy and his best friend, which is a 2-year gap, right? There's a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, which at that age, high school age, 15 and 17, is not terribly unusual, but a little unusual.
A little bit.
Like I had friends when I was 15 that were 17. It was because we were in a bigger group. My friends were all like 15, 16. His friends were 17, 18, and we just all kind of melded together, but it wasn't like he was my best friend and that I was there every day. So I thought back on that kind of social interaction of high school boys, thinking it's unusual to have best friends be 15, 17 gap. It's a gap in school, it's a gap in maturity, it's a gap in ability to do things. So that was one thing that we started to investigate. We did a lot of investigation on the knife itself, where he purchased it. I remembered from many ages ago, and in fact, my paralegal also and I had this discussion about it, like early up front. She's like, "Hey, don't you remember the statute on this?" And she remembered that there's a dangerous instrumentality statute that doesn't allow a business to sell a weapon to a person under 18 years of age without a parental permission.
Right. Yeah, I
So
would.
you have to have a parental permission. And this boy walked into a store, walked in, bought a knife that was bigger than the amount allowed by statute. So it was bigger than the statute amount. And the person at the counter never allegedly questioned him, got a note from him, checked it out. And when we started to look at the store's code of behavior and things that they do to protect the public from the laws on the state of, the Florida, state of affairs in Florida, when you walk up to a counter with a beer, it immediately triggers a warning that says, check the person's ID. So if they can do that with alcohol and they can do that with cigarettes and they can do that with lottery tickets, a lot more people are going to be killed with a knife that's this big than with a lottery ticket. So if you know to ask for a lottery ticket, you should know to ask for a knife. And they have nothing on their books for doing that. So that was our hook.
That is interesting again, because it wasn't when you first told me the details, the store wasn't something that I'd keyed in on, but the more I think about it, yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. In terms of the timeline of this case from when you first got that call from the neighbor to when this closed out, what did that look like? How long did this run from start to finish?
It ran a long time. It ran about 5 years from start to finish. A lot of it was based on the fact that we didn't want to interrupt the criminal case, and we didn't want to create a drag on the criminal case, and we didn't want to create an out on the criminal case. And so we wanted to make sure that we cooperated with all of the criminal processes that went on. And we did a lot of coordinating with the state attorney's office and with the police involved in the case. So that took some time. And the boy's defense lawyer did a great job. Like, he really tried hard to create a situation where he would get something less than consecutive maximum sentences. Unfortunately, or fortunately, honestly, it didn't work out, and he did get maximum consecutive sentences. So the boy is going to be away for a long, long time. I'm not a super religious person, and I'm not afraid of scary movies, horror movies or any of that. And I've never really been afraid of a human being that I've faced in a case. And I've done divorce cases where the husbands wanted to kill the wives because they were doing whatever. We were in a case one time where my partner actually had a spouse kill his client. So it was like we've had crazy people, right? I've never been scared of a human being until I saw the eyes on this boy. There is a moment when you realize that there is evil in the world. And when you look at the way this young person interacts on camera, he's a scary individual. He is truly evil.
I mean, to be able to do that, you have to have that capacity. So,
And to feel like the lack of remorse and just almost the like the deadness inside of his eyes. He's the scariest human being I've ever seen.
was this so the civil side of this did actually go to court? Was there a settlement that happened at some point on the civil side, or did it go all the
Yeah.
way to?
No. We ended up settling it on the civil side. There were a number of policies that we ended up getting. So the mother was living in a rental unit, and she had a rental policy, and we were able to collect her bodily injury coverage. The grandparents had a better insurance, and they had pretty decent insurance.
Yeah.
And they had a great defense lawyer who made some great calls. But in the end, I think that they didn't want this would have gone to the Supreme Court of Florida had we tried it. We would have gotten a claim against them. The grandparents knew he had a long history of problems. So when the boy was 13, 14, 15, he was a Nazi. He was, digging into the Nazis. And from 15 to 17, he was into ISIS. And he became an ISIS terrorist, converted Muslim, and was very ISIS terrorist, Islamist, and outwardly so, to the point that the FBI had warned everybody about him because they were tracking him.
Yeah.
So people knew. And that led us to the family that allowed him in. So the place where my son was, the house where he slept over, they had been talked to by the FBI and told, the boy's dangerous, don't. And they were told that they should definitely stay away from him and keep him away from the family. And they didn't, and they ignored that. And then they didn't warn my family about it, and they allowed my client to sleep over, which, hey, you want to expose your own family to it? So be it, but you can't expose everybody else to it.
Yeah,
so those policies came into play. Her homeowners came into play. So that was also out there. So that rounded up all the parties, and then we went after the store.
Yeah, and so when that negotiation process was sort of happening, or whatever the back and forth looked like, I know in every one of these kinds of cases, no matter what, the defendant or insurance company or whoever always attempts to minimize compensation however they can. That's just the nature of insurance companies. So how did you sort of approach that battle in terms of advocating for your client's interests? And what did that look like in terms of just the back and forth?
There was a lot of posturing about it's an intentional tort. No one could have appreciated this. No one knew it. And we kept digging in and throwing facts at them that eventually led everybody to believe that a jury would find differently. So it's a pretty much the same battle in all civil cases. The defense is like, we're not liable, and your client comes to court with, unclean hands. In this case, my client came to court with very clean hands.
Right.
So, like, and the other victims didn't come to court with clean hands. Like, the other victims of this crime came to court with knowledge that, they had, and I said, like, look, if you have a rabid dog in your house, don't invite in guests. If you get bit by your rabid dog, that's on you. But don't invite other people in, right? So that's kind of the way I postured this case. I was like, you had a severely mentally disturbed person hanging out with your kids. It's hard for me to say, hey, and I do feel terrible for them. I feel terrible for the family, the mother, and the young boy who was heroic, literally heroic, getting the neighbors to call the police was incredible, right? But they knew that he was a problematic kid.
Yeah. Um, I know you mentioned that the final outcome of the settlement is confidential. Obviously, it's a super sensitive case, but can you speak to just, obviously, this is one of those situations that it's like, no matter what, it's impossible to ever get resolution from an emotional or a psychological. It's such a tragedy. But at the same time, getting some sort of justice, right? Or some sort of outcome where there's some closure. Can you just kind of speak to that in terms of the family and where things are at now with, the sort of the epilogue or the after the case and how things have kind of played out since the end of the case?
So I wish I could tell you that there's a happy ending here and that something really great happened with this, Uh, I think that the settlement that we ended up coming to was better than the amount that we would have collected had we gotten a jury verdict for more money and then gone to appeal and had to deal with the appeal on it. And I think that we made a very good resolution for the client. And I think that she was very happy with the resolution. I think she needed to end the case. She needed this to end and have enough money to move her life forward in a positive way. But I think that her own internal things are going to make it so that there's never going to be a happy ending here for her. She's done some really nice things with the money. She created a monument to him, and she's given to some charities to try to create awareness and violence and things like that. But just unfortunately, in this particular instance, there's no amount that's going to make it good. So.
Well, this was a very tough one to talk about, Brian, but certainly something that we have not covered on Just Settled before. So thank you so much for being here today with us and sharing the story. Again, Brian LaBovick, founder of LaBovick Law Group, Florida and Massachusetts, serving both states for any personal injury, wrongful death, maritime, Social Security, disability. You're an incredible attorney, Brian, and I know this was a tragic case, but I'm sure at the same time the family was lucky to find you out of anybody to help them.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we felt that we could do a good job for her, and I think we did. So it's awesome. Thank you for that.